site that shows a firm that when we ran the initial numbers for them, they looked at it and said, these can't be right. They came back to us and actually were questioning our data because it showed that their client was spending 8 times what their peers were spending on health insurance, not 8% more, 8 times what their peers were spending on health insurance. And they're like, can this be right? I'm like, no, I forget how many manufacturing companies were in the data set, but it was significant enough that I'm like, yeah, I think this, I feel pretty confident in these numbers. So they asked, they started to go meet with the client. I said, can you do one thing for me though? Well, I'm just kind of curious. Would you find out how many employees they have? And luckily this firm was running the payroll. So they knew how many employees they had and how many people left. So when they ran those numbers, they actually determined the industry turnover at that time was 27%. And this firm had less than 2% turnover. And
Welcome to AFO Wealth Management Forward, a podcast about finance, accounting, technology, and entrepreneurship. We apply our decades worth of experience and insight into what makes businesses work, so we can help others grow both personally and professionally. In this ever-evolving marketplace, we help accounting firms and financial advisors grow their practice through the adoption of holistic wealth management services. Learn from industry leaders and subject matter experts to unlock the secrets of their success. A podcast that shows people and companies the transformative power of technology so they don't fear it, but instead harness it. Don't fight the robots, team up with them. And here are your hosts, Rory Henry, Director of Business Development, and CEO Rob Santos of Arrowroot Family Office.
All right, everybody. Once again, I'm joined by Will Hill of Will Hill Consults. Will, how are we doing today?
Rory, I'm doing fabulous. How are you?
I am doing great. It was scorching hot here in Los Angeles this past weekend. It was over 100 degrees. And so I try to make it outside, but I try to stay as much as possible in the air-conditioned house.
Well, and if you do go outside, I encourage you to wear a hat or maybe a little bit of sunscreen in the top of the dome there, Rory.
I do. You can see I didn't get burnt too much here.
Until just now.
Yeah, right? All right. Well, you have a great guest with us today, Will. He is the founder of Peerview Data, a leading analytics and advisory platform for accounting firms. He also runs big league tours, an official partner of Major League Baseball, which gives the people the opportunity to tour all the great Major League ballparks across the country. So without further ado, let me introduce our guest, Glenn Dunlap. Glenn, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Appreciate being here.
Yeah, appreciate you coming on. Well, let's get started. We always like to get a quick background for our audience here, of who you are and what you do at Peerview Data.
Yeah, thanks. My background is coming out of either being a part-time CFO, controller, that kind of stuff. Not from the standpoint of I'm not a CPA, so I didn't wear that hat, but I have done a lot more strategic planning, forecasting, modeling, helping clients with early stage companies with debt and equity placements, a lot of corporate finance oriented engagements or gigs. And so really what led me to start Peerview was my frustration with other applications. I just felt like there needed to be a better app that helped entrepreneurs and their advisors to make decisions about their business. And while there were some tools that I thought were sort of helpful in different roles, like if you were a banker, you had they largely used the RMA or things like that, but the RMA had revenue, COGS, OPEX, net income, and you weren't going to make any different operating decisions off of just knowing those 4 lines. And so, I kept saying somebody's got to do a better job of this. And finally, I sort of maybe rubbed that genie lamp one too many times, and it became me. So I set out to launch Peerview, and that's where we are today. So fast forward, that was, almost 11 years ago. So fast forward to where we are today, we have a web-based application that we sell almost exclusively to CPA firms, and CPA firms then use that to load their clients' historical data, usually out of their tax software, their audit software, or directly, connecting their client, their data from, QBO or Xero or one of the other apps that they might be using. And then it shows them how their clients are doing year over year by comment sizing that data. Then it shows them how they're doing compared to their peers within the same industry, region, revenue band, that kind of thing. And then it gives them suggestions about how they could help them improve. So it might be something like your accounts receivable days are 78, your peers are at 33. So let's talk about how we help you reduce your AR days down from 78 to something closer to the peer range. And we also put it in dollar figures, like ways that business owners can easily understand it. So if you don't know what AR days really stands for, but if you see a number that says $1.5 million in excess AR, then you start to have a better grasp of, 1.5 million. I think I know what I could do with that 1.5 million. So it starts to help the CPA explain it, helps the business owner understand it, and then helps them to act on that. So we have a forecasting tool and some other stuff that would help them to interpret that data for their clients. So let's do some what if scenarios. What if we were helping you to move that number closer to your peers? Then what would you do with the excess cash? Would you pay down debt? Would you invest in new equipment? Would you hire new staff and a new facility? Whatever it is, they can do those what if scenarios with them and help them really get a sense of where they're going. So we've been doing that for a number of years. We're working with firms across the country, and some of the top 10, top 20 firms, but also down to firms that are size of sort of single shingles that that have 20 or more clients that they want to work with, and they can connect to our app pretty easily. So.
Yeah. How robust is this data, and where are you pulling that data from, Glenn?
Yeah. So we, depending on the industry, there'll be hundreds or thousands of companies in each of those industries. We're pulling it. The number one source would be from the CPA firms that are connected and loading their client data in there. Then we also go to publicly available data. So IRS or Census Bureau, or we pull some Bureau of Labor Statistics data. We pull the data from the SEC or the publicly traded companies. So, we're getting data from a lot of different sources, but at this point, we're more dependent on the CPA firms themselves and the data that they're connecting and uploading than we are from any other source.
Yeah, and my question is, are there some common themes that you're seeing across these industries that really stick out to these firms once they put, their information in the system and see, what their peers are looking at?
It's interesting. We've spent a lot of time working in the healthcare space, and one of the things you see with that is that, the facilities that instantly we could see in the pandemic time, the monthly numbers we could see. March, really April was where they started to see things fall off, because they're usually a month or two behind in terms of collections. So, they saw the numbers drop off, but you also see things like, they're almost all sitting on $200,000 to $300,000 more in cash than what they had in the past. So that's a difference for them. We're seeing in some industries, you take like construction, we've been a lot of deep industry information there, and one of the things that you see is that revenues for firms are growing significantly. And we don't know the unit numbers, but my assumption is that there's a lot of increase in cost that has just been passed on in the form of higher costs, to higher revenue for them, and not necessarily, if you're a home builder, not necessarily number of units, but it just in terms of the cost that's been passed along there, and construction companies trying to hold on to their margins. So it's really, when you start to look, industry by industry, region by region, you can start to segment that and start to see differences with within the data, which is pretty helpful to a CPA firm, especially as they're talking to their client, to be able to say, hey, by the way, here's what we're seeing with our other clients. Here's what we're seeing with other companies in our region, or these are, across the board in terms of the industry, and maybe even help them get ahead of some of those trends or curves that they're seeing.
Glenn, what would you say to a firm owner who says, hey, most of my clients are maybe smaller family held businesses. I don't think they'd have an interest in this sort of information?
Yeah, I mean, we do hear that a lot, or none of my clients are asking me for this, so I'm not going to sign up for this, or something like that. But typically the thing that we've found is that, that the smaller firms have just as much of a desire to understand how they're doing and how they're doing compared to their peers as somebody that's larger that may just not be quite as sophisticated yet. They may not understand a lot of the terms that you're throwing at them yet, but they certainly want to know. And I think there's a part of us that all of us who are entrepreneurs are competitive in nature, and we want to know kind of what's that scorecard, how are we doing? And we also may not know the questions to ask. And so that's where I say, from a firm perspective, that it's one of those things where you could go to them and say, hey, I've run your numbers against the industry data, and I've got 3 or 4 things I'd really love to talk to you about. And so then it frames the conversation about, hey, I see that you're really different here. Let's talk about why that might be. And there may be a really good reason that they've chosen to do what they're doing. And, or they may have just sort of stumbled into it and they've not made the choice there, but they also kind of don't know that maybe I could do that better, or I just the way that we've always done it. So I think, the smaller firms, comparing $1 million firm to $150 million firm doesn't make any sense. But when you can filter by size and give them something that says, hey, let's compare you to other companies within your range, it certainly does, start to tee up those conversations to make a lot more sense. The other thing I found is that, like, even smaller firms, companies, clients that are, small, maybe they're small, family held, closely held, whatever, they often have aspirations to be larger. And so I think the other part of it is kind of helping them to see, here's where you are in this range, but let's talk about what it's going to look like for you when you cross that $10 million, threshold. And what are we seeing in terms of, OpEx or administrative things that are different, or, what might you have in terms of purchasing power at that point that can help you with margins, or any of those kinds of things that would start to help somebody see that, oh, well, there's a reason why I may want to push to get from 7 million to 10 million, or there may be a reason, that there are some things that we could focus on and build in as part of our overall strategy. But you don't know if you don't have that conversation. And that's why I am always encouraging the CPA firms to run the numbers and then take the data out to meet with the client. I mean, for one reason, who's going to resist your CPA calling you saying, hey, I've run your numbers and I've got 3 or 4 things that I think could really help you improve. Let's have a conversation next Tuesday, whatever. I mean, nobody's going to turn that call down. I mean, you're going to take that call. You're going to have that conversation and see what they have to help you improve your business. And it just changes the conversation completely, right?
Absolutely. In fact, I've said for a few years now, and Rory's heard me say this in other conversations, that we have to, in this CPA profession, we have to listen to our clients differently than we ever have. In a lot of ways, we've got to ask different questions. And I've been asked by a number of clients and accounting firms saying, well, what questions do I ask to get the conversation to shift? And this is just a phenomenal method to say, hey, let me show how by staying in my comfort zone of analytical and numbers and looking at those areas, now I can just show my client how we just open up the scope a little bit further. And now all of a sudden we're having a different conversation about behavior changes, growth changes, impacts on price changing, all these other sort of things that you may not do as a CPA for your client, but pointing them in the right behavioral step direction it falls right within your wheelhouse. And that's going to begin to open it up. You're not going to have to keep going to them for those conversation changes. You do that 1 or 2 times, they're going to start coming to you even more proactively saying, okay, you helped me with this last time, Glenn. Now I'm looking to do something totally different. What do you know about the materials that make up socks? Right. And all of a sudden you're like, I don't know, I'm just an accountant, but we're going to find out, because this is all related to what we're trying to do together, except for the sock part. I just made that up, to be honest.
I actually used to have a client who made socks, so that was So that's one that I could maybe even speak a little bit to, but that's funny. I think it does change that, and it can change the frequency of the conversation, like you mentioned. That it's, instead of it being something where we're going to have first of the year tax conversation, maybe end of the year if you're lucky to do some tax planning with them, but then beginning of the year where they're doing their data dump for taxes or prepping for an audit. Once you get on the other side of April 15, April 30, a lot of times I hear from firms, they just have a very difficult time getting back in front of their clients because we're all busy, so it takes that, it would mean that you could change that cycle where you have the ability to not only reach out to them, but to do it with value. And it's not just a fishing expedition where you're looking for something to do. It's something you've got some ideas about, some things you could share with them. And you go armed with that information. And I loved what you said about, they can stay in their comfort zone. That's what I always tell firms, play to your strengths. The numbers and these numbers better than anybody else, and you can help them interpret that in a way that's meaningful to them. So it's a great place to start.
Yeah. Are you using this both with firms on the audit side as well as on the advisory side? Are both entities using this?
Yeah, I would say, audit, advisory, and the CAS practices are the main areas where we see a lot of firms picking it up. But you take tax, and I think where I've pitched, to tax partners, because it's not going to be a direct impact on the tax engagement itself, but when you've got a tax only client that you're trying to move into an advisory conversation or move into a CAS engagement, that can be a plus, where you're delivering something other than just a tax return to them, and you take that conversation and say, hey, we've run your numbers and we've got some ideas for you. But when you think about the advisory side, that's pretty straightforward. CAS, the CAS practice, when they're doing the accounting work, a lot of times firms are looking for ways to do dashboarding and forecasting, and all of those things that can tie together. And we've got some tools to do that. The audit side, it's been interesting. We've had firms for a long time that have used our the peer data, because they're, from an audit analytics standpoint, they're expected to compare their clients to, not only past years or their expectations, but they could also use peer data. And having that consistent for all of their clients is tough, unless they do only construction clients, and they maybe can go get, CFMA data or something like that. But it's having it to be able to cover, their manufacturing, their construction, their, whatever the different industries that they're looking at. It's, it helps them provide a consistent product there. Not only just for the analytics, but we've been working with some of our clients to build out some working paper analytics and expense analytics, tools that, are going to give them the ability to switch between those different. They can look at the, year over year, they can look at their peers, they can look at the forecast that they've built in the app, and start looking at the comparisons for expectations, and it really meets those audit analytic requirements. And that's a nice feature for them, because instead of having to build each of those in Excel and try to figure out, some of those tools, it's a flip of a switch for them by loading the data in. So that's it's kind of a new area, and that's having never been an auditor, it's I'm a little bit out of the water in that space, but thankfully we've got some clients that are just have been pulling us in that direction. Have been fantastic to work with there. So.
Yeah, and that leads me in, and we discussed it before we started recording here, about the news about Ernst & Young looking to move forward with splitting off audit and advisory. I'd love to hear both of your thoughts on these recent developments. I know Will and I have talked to a number of different guests on the podcast, private equity's involvement in the profession. It seems like things are accelerating here as they split off, and they're more moving more towards advisory, and then having that attestation side as well.
I don't know, Will, if you want to take that, you want me to take that?
Well, so yeah, Rory, I think it's interesting to continue to see what does that do in terms of firm relationship, right? So what Glenn just mentioned about the tax partner and peer data, and how, hey, we can look to expand the engagement of the client beyond tax. There's been a lot of conversation in recent years around how do we organically grow the client revenue, because it's less expensive to sell more services to the same client than it is to go land a new one. And so, when you're not dealing with issues of independence, that's a great conversation to go have. But as soon as you step into the independence area, it gets a little bit more mucky. And I know that mucky is a really super technical term that holds up in court real well, but that's just, it's interesting to see. And, clearly I'm not part of E&Y, nor am I sitting in on their secret meetings. I have no dirt on any of the kind of international discussions that are happening with E&Y, but you do have to sit back and, kind of look at that and say, it's interesting to watch how that goes, and what does that mean in terms of where they see their future with CAS and tax. And what does that do to the next tier of firms down below from a competitive perspective? That's also really interesting. That's something to watch. That's not a commentary item, right? I have no idea what it does. It's just something that I think is curious to watch going forward. So there's my overly verbose response, Rory.
All right. Glenn, you have any thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've talked to several firms about this, and kind of, it's what happens in the Big Four ultimately, has, it either trickles down and or does have an impact on the next tier, and then that has so it's all going to change. And like Will, I don't know if that necessarily means that we'll see the next 296 firms, all shedding their audit practices. I sincerely doubt that. I think but I do think it signals to everybody else that how important advisory is, and where the future is going to be. I mean, certainly we're already feeling there's been a discussion in the profession for 20 years about moving from compliance to consulting. We need to be a better advisor and all of these things, and trusted advisor, better advisor, all those things have been bantied around for a long time. But I think the last few years have really sort of emphasized that. And I think one challenge I think that firms are going to have, I mean, they're already short staffed, right? So then you take firms that have people that are really good at tax, really good at audit, but have not spent a lot of time in that advisory space. And they're going to need some help in terms of being able to have those conversations and be proactive. I mean, the point that they've been so far has been very reactive. They've been busier than they've ever needed to be, and so I think the discussion to move to that is it's going to have to be driven from the top, and there's going to be training, there's going to be discomfort, there's going to be a lot of things that are going to have to take place in order for firms to do that. And that's not a criticism of anybody in any role inside this firms. It's just that you're going to tell somebody that, hey, you've been auditing, and now we want you to pick up the phone, go sit down and tell a business owner what you think that they're doing wrong or what they could be doing better. That's a change of, I mean, you get to sort of hide behind the audit tools to do to do that conversation. This is what we found with the numbers. Now it's going out and saying, here's how I think you should change it. That's a different conversation, and not one that everybody is prepared to have. So I think it's going to be an impact. How deep and wide it'll be, I don't know exactly, but I think the firms that we're talking to are already thinking, we've got to be better advisors now. What do we do with that? And I tend to think that starting with with the data that you have in house is a great place to start. And as I think Will said earlier, was just, you're numbers people. So lean on the numbers and have the conversation around that, not about your baby's ugly, but let's talk about, the metrics that we're seeing that we can help you improve.
Yeah. So Glenn, you started getting into an area that is kind of a passionate area of mine. And that is, you have to understand where your value is as the individual service provider. And for those that are wrestling with this big change in the profession that's happening, going, oh no, I can't just sit back and do X anymore. If that feels a safety risk to you as an individual, as a professional individual, then that tells me that you've missed a little bit of the boat about where you're truly bringing value to your customer. Because the value for your customer all along should have been, how am I helping them achieve their goals? I may be playing a different role within a team in the firm of how we're going to do that together. But if I believe that my value is only in doing the technical piece, and that's all, I've limited where I can go. I have to be able to see that my value to my customer is well beyond that, and it has stepped out from there. And the management of firms has to look now and say, how do we take and not just communicate what their value is to clients and communicate that value to clients, but then how do we organizationally and from a workflow and efficiency perspective, bring that value and accentuate it, right? Tools like yours, Peerview Data, great opportunity to accentuate that value, because I'm not sitting there running numbers and trying to do my own comparisons. Computers can do that. But I've got to be able to have the communication. I have to be able to explain cause and effect from a decision perspective. So I think this is just a big piece of, you have to be able to identify your value correctly to thrive in this marketplace, no matter your firm size. Rant is over.
Well, I totally agree, and I think it's something that firms are they're starting to. More firms are recognizing that and are putting some wheels in motion on it, but it's still a challenge. I heard one firm that the managing partner kind of brought everybody together and said, we need to be better advisors. Ready, break, any sort of
Go team.
explanation about what how are we going to do that? What's the expectation in terms of top line growth or number of clients served or anything like that? It was just let's be better advisors. Here we go. And it's there needs to be thought around it and some tools put into place, just like there are tools for tax and audit. There need to be tools for the advisory piece, and I think that as you start to look at that space, I think taking the data you already have and helping that to grow that would be a wise place to start.
Yeah, I mean, we touched on a couple of different things here: staffing, talk about training. My question to you, Glenn, is with your platform, is this something that's intuitive? I mean, when they pick this up, is there training that needs to be involved, or is this something that they innately are good at analyzing the data and people communicates that to business owners to sell this CAS service?
Yeah, it's gonna vary on the person. It's gonna vary on the client. It's gonna but we offer. So I guess you can sign up for the straight from our website and sign up and start using it with clients and never having talked with us. Using the app and the resources that are out there. Then in other cases, we last week I was in New York City training a floor of people that on helping them to incorporate this into their advisory practice. So it's part of it's the it's not so much about you don't know what a debt to equity ratio is or how to explain that to a client. It's really about incorporating resources into your processes, as more than it is anything else, because there's a shift. We all log in and use the same tools every day, and to add another tool to that requires you to make a change. And so to get people to open the app and just get in the habit of it, get comfortable with it. You can probably see up on habit up here is one of my the books. But I think it's just the process of getting people to make that shift is more than anything the biggest challenge for adoption and total engagement.
Yeah. And I saw one of your use cases where they talked about a firm or a business that thought they were undercompensating their employees. But when they looked at their peers, they actually were higher compensated than their peers. And they did a survey and uncovered a number of different things. Can you talk about that use case? I thought it was great. That was on the site.
Yeah, I mean the firm was a professional service provider, and they were having turnover that they were unhappy with, and it was pretty high. I don't remember the number off the top of my head. It's like significant. I mean, tens of 20s, in terms of percents, which was forcing them to go out and do recruiting and training and onboarding and all that stuff, and just a loss in productivity, and it was costing them significantly, lost revenue opportunities, that kind of thing. So when they looked at it, they thought, I mean, sort of the knee-jerk reaction is everybody's leaving, let's bump everybody's pay by 10% or 20% or whatever the number is to keep them. What do we need to be? And they realized that they were competitive. And so the challenge was that they didn't give their employees a long enough vision of what it meant to stay. Like, what are my opportunities if I stay here for more than a year or two? What are my possibilities? Can I become an owner or a partner in the firm, or will I have growth opportunities to take on managerial roles and things like that? So once they realized that it was a communication issue, then they started addressing that, and they significantly cut their turnover without having to do a huge raise in their compensation across the board, which probably would have priced them out of being competitive in several markets. So it was a really interesting step for them. And I think a lot of times it's you'll dig into the numbers, and what you'll find is either sometimes confirms the things that you thought, and then other times it forces you to scratch your head and go, wait, why are we still losing people if we're paying, if we're very competitive against our peers? Then that forced them to dig deeper, and you just have to be prepared to ask those questions. And I would say, if you're a CPA and you're thinking about having the conversation with the client about this too, the challenge there becomes don't feel like you have to have all of the answers when you go into this. You can ask the question, like if they're asking why we is turnover's a problem for us, so let's maybe we need to bump compensation, help us understand that. And if so, you get into it and find out, no, really compensation isn't the problem. So what would the next thing be? So then, start asking the questions and just continue to help them to turn that Rubik's Cube until you figure out the solution, right? It's not always just, can't just solve the one side and
Right.
there's everything. So, yeah.
Yeah, there's something about the spending of money where when you have to do it from a data-based perspective, you can do it confidently. But when it's with your gut, man, it isn't just a lack of confidence sometimes that comes with that spending, but there's a lot of resentment, possibly negatively viewing others that it involves in the case of compensation, spending more in comp. If we do the research and we've got to up everyone's pay by 5%, great. We're behind the market. No one wants to be behind the market. Great. No big deal. We just bump it up 5% because we feel like we're underpaying people and people are leaving. Now all of a sudden we look at the employee who got the most dollars out of their 5% and we go, oh, I don't know if we start having the second thoughts because we don't have a numbers-based perspective from where it came from. So I think it's a great example.
Especially if turnover didn't change. So you bump everybody's pay 5 or 10% and your turnover is still, high. And then you're thinking, well, what number should it have been? That really wasn't even the issue. So yeah, I mean, you're totally right. Think about how, the spending, if it's data driven, that makes sense. But if you spent that 5 or 10% to comp and turnover continued to stay high, boy, not only did you feel bad about making that gut call, but then you're committed and you've got all these people, so yeah, it definitely helps. There are plenty of examples too. Like there's another, I think there's a case study on our site that shows a firm that when we ran the initial numbers for them, they looked at it and said, these can't be right. They came back to us and actually were questioning our data because it showed that their client was spending 8 times what their peers were spending on health insurance, not 8% more, 8 times what their peers were spending on health insurance. And they're like, can this be right? I'm like, well, I forget how many manufacturing companies were in the data set, but it was significant enough that I'm like, yeah, I think this, I feel pretty confident in these numbers. So they asked, they started to go meet with the client. I said, can you do one thing for me though? Well, I'm just kind of curious. Would you find out how many employees they have? And luckily this firm was running their payroll. So they knew how many employees they had and how many people left. So when they ran those numbers, they actually determined the industry turnover at that time was 27%. And this firm had less than 2% turnover. And so when you looked at the metric that we use, is Society of Human Resource Management has a calculation that calculates the cost of turnover. And when you look at the cost of turnover for their peers to theirs, 8 times health insurance was actually cheaper than the turnover rate if they had had 27% of their people turning over. So it was a strategic decision that they had made to not only pay for their employees' health insurance, but all of their family, 100% of their health insurance was covered, and they had a great plan, and it kept people from leaving. So they just didn't have, the turnover, the recruiting, the training, the lost revenue. They didn't have any of those costs associated with it. And so it was an interesting thing that initially sort of the knee jerk was that, hey, you need to slash your health insurance costs compared to your peers. But when they looked at turnover, they realized that, oh my goodness, that's actually saving you money because you don't have the turnover that the industry has. So
wow, it's amazing. All right, to shift kind of lastly here, Glenn, I am interested in big league tours. I'm a big Major League Baseball fan. Can you talk about what you're doing with that company?
Yeah, I have kind of a bad habit of better mousetrap kind of thing, when I went through actually a program at my church, and it was a kind of a challenge that before I die, I want to, and there were a series of columns and categories you went through. It wasn't all bucket list stuff, but there was a bucket list column, but there was another column about leaving a legacy and that kind of stuff. So But in that bucket list, it was, I want to go to all 30 stadiums. And it's something I talked to my dad about doing when I was a kid. And I had a son at the time who was, 4 or 5 when we were kicking it around. And so as we started looking at it, I thought, man, I'm not going to have my dad forever. And my son's not going to think I'm cool for much longer. So let's get out there and let's go do this. And, as I started looking at other tour providers, they sat in the upper decks of the stadiums and, stayed in Newark when they went to see the Yankees or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, gosh, if I'm going to be a Yankee,
This is a
I'm
great
going to be in
experience.
New York one
Yeah.
time. I want to stay in the heart of the city. I want to sit in great seats.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, maybe there are other people like me that want to do it that way. So we launched Big League Tours in 2006, and besides 2020 with the pandemic, it's been a really fun experience. 2020 was pretty brutal, but we made it through, and actually are now selling tours for 2023, and it's we're off to a fantastic start, our best start ever. So I think there are a lot of people that have sort of been, had sort of pent up demands for travel and are just like, monkeypox be damned, we're going anyway. So we're gonna go see what we want to see, and we're not gonna buy into the story that we need to stay home anymore. We're going. So it's things have been good.
I love it. Do you have a favorite, like a top 5, Glenn, of stadiums?
Yeah, it's kind of a moving target a little bit. I think for me, as a fan experience, going to Fenway Park is that's just the oldest. It's one of the smallest. It's just you're so close to the field, and it has just such a old time classic baseball feel when you go. So there's always have a soft spot for that. I always surprise people when I tell them that Petco Park is one of my top 5, but I love going to San Diego. I mean, it's hard. It's 72 and sunny all the time, so it's hard to argue against Petco. It's a great ball stadium to see a game and stuff like that. But I'm a Reds fan, so I'm kind of partial to going to Cincinnati. Although it's been kind of tough the last
tough COVID,
yeah, I don't know,
decades,
a lot of years, a lot of years. We'll just leave it at that. But it's I think the stadiums are and teams they're competing like anything else, and it's the game has changed, and I don't think we all understand the shift on every industry and what the pandemic did. And I think, what they say, it takes 6 weeks or 3 months or something like that to really change people's habits. And, live events got rocked because that was nobody was able to go to live events. And so that really changes things significantly. And I think, that live experience, anybody that's producing those kinds of things has to really, I think that, through how they're offering that. But it's, if you love baseball and you love going to stadiums and experiencing new stadiums, you feel like traveling and being part of it, in a city and experiencing those, it's a really fun thing to do. And I got to tell you, I started it because I want to be with my dad and my son, and my daughters have now, done most of the stadiums and have experienced that with me. And so we've enjoyed, that. I got a chance to do all 30 with my dad and my son.
Oh, very nice.
And then, the sideline benefit is that I didn't realize how much I would enjoy seeing 2 and 3 generations out on the road with us and them getting a chance to experience it. And, we have a thing now where we celebrate when any of our guests hit their 30th stadium. So we do, fun different things that we kind of mark that and enjoy that with them. And so we had a lady this year, single lady from Texas that had, she did all 30 with us. And, so to experience that and to be a part of that celebration is just a total blast. So this, it's a lot of fun.
That's cool. All right. Thank you so much, Glenn. This was great. If anybody wants to get in touch with Big League Tours or Peerview Data, what's the best way to do so?
Just those sites, peerviewdata.com,
right.
bigleaguetours.com. And, we're out there. We'd love to connect and help you out any way we can.
Great. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining me.
Glad to be here. Thank you. And thank you, Glenn.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys.
All opinions expressed by Rob Santos and Rory Henry on this website podcast interview are solely their opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Arrowroot Family Office LLC or their parent company or affiliates, and may have been previously disseminated on television, radio, internet, or another medium. You should not treat any opinion expressed by anyone as a specific inducement to make a particular investment or follow a particular strategy, but only as an expression of their opinions. Past performance is not indicative of future results.